a slightly slow start caused by I don't know what, but we'll get it sorted. Those other people are still trying to get in, but we'll give it a go. For those who've not met my lovely face before, my name's Andrew Maliphant. I've just come in. No, I haven't just come off the road. I'm here from the Great Collaboration. We're going to talk about what are the messages that we can get across to people. We quite often, when we're doing training events, or maybe even training events like this, we find ourselves preaching to the converted. Then eventually those numbers dwindle because the people who are converted are getting good stuff from elsewhere. They don't have to listen to us anymore. So what is the way of getting our messages across to people who are not perhaps as committed as we are? This is in early stages because time was when we had different messages which all seem to have gone past their sell-by date, and be very glad to hear from what people are thinking about how we might add some extra messages just now and how we might devise them. So this meeting is being recorded. The ideas that we have will be collected. Very keen myself to get some of these messages straight and how we do them. Just to say, because it's being recorded, if people do not want their front rooms or back rooms to appear on the recording, best just to turn off your videos and just use the audio only. So I'm now going to start a presentation. I don't seem to have to do it this way. Okay. So, this is a great Irish comedian called Frank Carson, and his catchphrase, of course, was the way I tell them. It's the way I tell them. Sadly, no longer with us. Where we are today, I think it is the way we tell them. The word climate turns about a third of our audience off at the moment. We get using it all the day amongst ourselves, and that's why. But we have to think of different ways of getting our message across because different people are thinking about this in different ways. So, for example, I went to an event in Cardiff the other week, and they said, it's no good trying to get people engaged in an atmosphere of impending doom. We're all doomed. If we have that sort of atmosphere, then it's not going to work very well. We know what the issues are. We can see it very clearly on that graph from NASA. We understand what the issues are ourselves, but that isn't going to actually make the big difference to a number of people out there in our nation, Great Britain and the United Kingdom. So let's have a look at the whole issue. Some of the messages that have come out so far on the topic which we engaged in. Going all the way back to 1972, there was a Stockholm conference. I was still at school at the time. I don't know if anybody else remembers that. Everyone deserves a clean, healthy environment was apparently the summary from that particular event. We know about the Brundtland Commission, Our Common Future, which is a publication we can get online. Sustainable development to promote economic growth or protect the environment for future generations. If you remember, there was a catchphrase about making use of the resources while making sure that future generations also have access to resources, which is a longer way of putting the same thing together. So these things have been around for a while. Rare Earth Summit, 1992, of course. Lots of things were being said at that occasion, some great international cooperation on that. Again, must remember Agenda 21. We're suddenly getting an awful lot more detail. Combating poverty, conserving managing natural resources, sustainable agriculture, and so forth. All these notes are going to be shared at the end of the meeting, of course, so don't frankly have to write all these things down. So, you know, there's been a lot going on for a while, and the messages in a way have been getting more detailed as we go along. Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said in 2015, if global warming goes an average of 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels, they may lead to irreversible changes. And that was a message that we've been using quite a lot of using quite recently. However, we reached that last year. So what are we going to say next? Because we certainly can't say that anymore. Where are the positive messages? Let's think about what can we say things in a positive way, rather than to say the impending doom. There's an image from a cartoon character called Chicken Little. Those of us who may remember the story of Chicken Little. The sky is falling, the sky is falling. And it was all part of a con by the foxes to get him into the hen house. So we have a problem here. What are we going to say next? So just have a bit of a think about what are the steps of effective communication anyway. Here's one of the most famous communicating posters of all time, Lord Kitchener in the First World War. So obviously we've got to say what our message is. We know what our message is and what we're trying to get across. So we have to think about it. Who are we going to get it across to? Okay, those are who are our audiences for it. I think Kitchener got to, or whoever did the Kitchener image have got that fairly well taken. So we need to find what's the appropriate medium. The Kitchener's timing was posters. There are other ways of reaching people, as we know these days. We get the message out, listen to the responses. This is the big thing, because it's not communication if we don't get a reply. If nobody comes back to us, sorry, we can't say that we have communicated with them. We can't be sure of that. I'm sure we've all got personal experience of this that we might be able to share. So we get a reply, and the reply, different kinds of replies, of course. If we're clued up and sensible, we would then redraft our messages according to its reply. If there's a conversation starts, there's a conversation. If the message hasn't hit the spot, then we have to think about how it might hit the spot, and then we can sort of repeat as necessary. This seems to be the sort of place we're all in at the moment. You know, we've got to think about what is the effective message and how we get it across, but also listening to people and see what they say to it when they hear it. Because other people have other different priorities, that have other things on their minds. And it may be that what we've put together may not actually be floating their boat. Okay. So it's a jungle out there, the climate action jungle. As you've heard me before, now I speak about this quite a lot. Lots of things to be doing. We all have different priorities about what we're doing about climate action, climate change, mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity, different things for different times and places. So, okay, so let's say we'll put the messages to one side for the moment. We will have different messages that we'll have, either particular ones or general ones. We need to work together to try and find some good general ones that can be used more widely. So let's have a look at the audiences. Now we've got here something that was being researched by a charity called Climate Outreach. So the only British charity focusing on public engagement with climate change, which is quite something. So they've done this work. There's a link there to where the work is there. And they've identified 7 different audiences. There are 7 different types of people when you start talking about climate. I'm going to talk about them individually in a minute and see where we go through with that. Progressive activists, perhaps those of us on this call, all of us feel like we're progressive activists. If that's who we are, then we're only 8% of the issue. If we're speaking to the converted all the time, it's 8% speaking to the same 8% time and time again. So we'll have to see what else we might do. Oh, by the way, as we go through the different ones, you might think, well, which ones are we as individuals? We may not be progressive activists. We may be some other kind of person. So what I'm going to show now is going through what climate outreach say about those different audience groups and what that might mean in practice to ourselves. So progressive activists, they say, vocal and passionate, politically active. I won't read out all of these things because it's there. What I put in a summary word at the end of these things, all these notes are from climate outreach, except for my summary at the end. And I've summarized that with outrage. These are people that are passionate and wanting to do something. So there we are. That's 8% of that thing. And they feel just showing about government's failings. Whether the next government will have the same failings, we'll find out, of course. Backbone conservatives. This is there. They're not talking about conservatives as in Tories. They're talking about conservatives with a small c, if you like. Very proud to be British and all the rest of it. They're skeptical about some of the fancier terms, claims and so forth, virtue signaling, symbolic lifestyles changes. So I've put it's hot air. So none of these people are being categorized as bad people in any way. It's just that their views of the world and their view of climate in particular. But see, backbone conservatives, they reckon, takes up nearly a quarter of the British population. That's quite a few. So that's something to be thinking about. Civic pragmatists, people are wanting to do stuff. They'd like to get their hands dirty, get into stuff. They want to know how to do things. They're looking to support progressive climate policies when they see them. So show me. They need to see what they can do, what can make a difference. So this is about showing people that something happening. So this is a theme to come back to, I think, as we go forward. So that's an 1/8 of the population will likely to get involved if we have something that we can show them that they can do. Okay. All these notes are also on the, apart from my summary things, are on that climate outreach link I put. Established liberals, another 1/8 of the population. The people are quite well off. Don't necessarily something as climate change will affect them. They're interested in things about low carbon to do with economic resilience and economic growth. Okay. So I've called that comfort. These are people that are not necessarily going to engage. Well, if they are going to engage, they're going to engage in a different way from others. I think this is the point. People will engage, but in different ways. What climate outreach says, on the whole, most people are alert to climate action, climate change, and the requirements, but they're going to respond to it in different ways. Disengaged battlers. These are people who are having trouble making ends meet, keeping their lives together, doing all the things that they have to do to survive from day to day. And they may think it's important, but they actually haven't got the time to do it, get involved in it. They're too busy to get heavily engaged. So they're disengaged battlers. So there are people like that. And there we go. Okay. Disengaged traditionalists, disillusioned and skeptical. They can see that there are risks, but far from sold on the need. We may have all of us heard, but why should I do anything about it when China is busy, still burning coal, we get a bit of that from people. The fact that China has actually put in more solar panels over the last 12 months than the United States have since the fabric was founded is neither in there. So there's ways we might have to then respond to some of these things. When I was learning to be a salesman, being taught how to be a salesman, by the way, I was trying to get appointments to see people to sell them computers, as it turned out. I went on a course that said there's only 11 things people can say to stop you going to have an appointment with them. So these are the 11 answers you can do in order to get back in there and just try and get round to make the appointment. So with these different groups, you have to start thinking about, if we're going to meet people like this, what do we say to them? The different languages, how do we respond to what they're going to be saying? And there's I think we probably need some words about China somewhere along the line as well. Another quarter of the population, loyal nationalists. Put my teeth in, loyal nationals. Proud to be British. Threatened by crime, immigration. But to see it more as a localized issue, there are things that could be done locally to make a difference rather than the global responses. So these are perhaps, I think there's some of the people like that within the room here today. I've called that neighborhood. I had difficulty finding a summary word for this, actually. But I think the description makes it fairly clear as to where we're at. So there we are. We've got quite a lot of different perspectives from people, from some sensible research based on this very issue that we're about. How do we actually understand about getting these messages across? Well, there are 7 different groups within the population. So how are we going to get our messages across to all these people? And so again, I say some of us may have some stories to share in a bit about how things are difficult. So what's the key differences between them? How do we understand this a bit? Okay, so these are the bits on the left of these screens are also from Climate Outreach. So they're saying climate change is one of the most important issues facing the world for 8%. For the disengaged segments, it's less urgent day to day. So on the right there, a single message, sky is falling or equivalent, is not going to motivate everyone. I think we all know this anyway, but this is very clear. So we need to listen to what people feel is important to them and adjust our messages accordingly. People will say different things. I had a talk from Save Our Shropshire the other day, and they were, Richard Watkins was very much saying this point. What is important to them? Let's hear what they have to say. So we talk about co-benefits. What are the extra things that people enjoy from climate action of different kinds? There's been a lot of effort lately in terms of net zero, getting targets for net zero. The Tory government, there are various people in there were saying, well, let's drop all this net zero stuff because apart from anything else, we can't afford it. So again, some net zero will work with some people, but not with anybody. What about the co-benefits? Now, there are lots of things that can happen that will have a benefit both for response to climate and a non-localized benefit. Here we are, people on electric bikes getting out of their cars and getting on bikes. Of course, there's better exercise for them apart from anything else. They're getting out the fresh air, meeting people, as you can see. There's some benefits there. You don't know that Food Bank does have a benefit in terms of climate action because it's preventing waste. It's stuff going to waste. It's being used by other people. Less waste, so more effective food distribution, and therefore, less things coming in plastic packages from different countries. Oh, by the way, I was told the other day that we're all truckarians. Forget vegetarians and meat eaters or omnivores or whatever. We're all truckarians because we all eat what comes in the trucks to the local shops. So that's an interesting idea. So 3 days, of course, of no trucks, and we're going to be struggling a bit, but that's for another day. And the repair cafe, of course, getting in there, as well as saving people having to buy more things and increasing the production of goods, the throwaway society. Let's repair what we've got and do something about them. Again, that can also be a way of meeting people community repair cafes, as well as saving pennies. Okay. So another issue that's come up, some people are more likely to think about in terms of global, complex global systems. Some of the progressive activists, politicals may think along those ways. Other segments more galvanized by stuff closer to home. So think globally, act locally. Yep, we've heard that one before. That still operates. Save our planet isn't going to work for everyone because not everybody thinks in terms of the planet. Okay. By the way, it's not the planet that's at risk as much as humankind, but that's another matter again. So save our planet. No, maybe we can't say that anymore. If we can show that action can make a difference at home, again, this is another show and tell exercise. Show people what's happening. Show the practical stuff. Show how it works. And then global benefit perhaps can be a bit more of an afterthought. So there's a thing there. I think I'm becoming known as Mr. Allotments. I'm a great fan of having more allotments. Let's grow our own food. Better food, healthier food gets us out again in the open air, meeting people. And certainly in terms of town and parish councils, we have a natural run-in to look for sites for allotments. If there aren't any, if we've got some planning applications coming, they're looking for planning gain. Okay, my friends, if you want to build all these houses, let's have some allotments. Thank you very much. Just an idea. So that's another way of doing it. So there are other ways that we can be making things happen locally. Trust in institutions. General election on, guys, but all segments are pretty disillusioned with politics at the moment, according to Climate Outreach. Want governments to lead, but there's also about half of us are more deeply held about elites. You know, this is the them and us idea. Okay, and you know, they're not going to accept rhetoric from people that they're not close to. They're not going to just listen to slogans. Leveling up, of course, has been exposed as just a political slogan rather than anything that's going to make a difference. We've heard a lot more about a just transition. What is a just transition? How can we respond to climate change in a way that is just and equally benefits everybody in our societies? Once more, again, seeing is believing. People will need to see stuff in order to believe it. So let's gather and share good practice and share successes. That could be something that we can do here. Seems to be a bit of theme building here in terms of how we gather information, how we might share it. Oh, here's a picture of from a community energy scheme in Kent, as it turns out. There are different ways, lots of different community energy events happening, and other sorts of community enterprises as well. But that's one thing that may be appropriate to certain audiences. Might be for everybody, but for certain audiences. Getting the pictures right is all. This picture tells 1,000 words. Some pictures are more universally effective than others. The last thing that Climate Outreach was saying was about income and wealth. So that about half of us tend to be not only being more wealthy, but more likely to adopt new technology. Okay, but other groups are not so likely to be into that, not least because they're on lower incomes. I didn't carry out this research, by the way. I'm reporting to you what Climate Outreach have got on there. So solar panels, not for everybody. Hydroponic factories, which I've seen a lot of lately. It's the one where I live in the Forest of Dean, funny enough. These aren't things going to float everybody's boat again. We need more affordable and scalable solutions. What are things that can actually be rolled out everywhere, and which is what I mean by scalable, as well as being more affordable. Some of this may be about an old phrase, intermediate technology. In other words, not the fanciest stuff. Somebody was saying to me the other day, we've got some of these old water mills still around, which seem to have their walls and their rivers intact. What about reviving some of those to get some local energy into our communities? Interesting idea. So it'd be nice to have something that doesn't have to be managed by an electric circuit or a microchip. But anyway, there we go. So what is the practical vision for the future? I've seen some various descriptions of it, but there's a very brave person who can say that they know exactly what the world we're moving toward is going to look like when we get there. We know it's going to look like what we were like when we were children. What's it going to look like in the future? So we may have seen the David Attenborough film, A Life on Our Planet, which is, I think it's still available on Netflix. I could never get to the bottom of exactly who had created this image, but you can see it's a bit of London, and they've worked it out as to London with keeping its tall buildings with a lot more greening at ground level. What these things are with pointing to the skies, I actually don't really know. They look a bit, I don't know what they are. So that's an actual image that I found. I've heard descriptions, I've read descriptions, who say, oh, let's have bus stops with fruit trees on 3 sides of them, and maybe a green roof on the shelter. Okay. We'll find out what it probably may well not look the same everywhere, of course, but what is the actual vision? If seeing is believing, what is it going to be looking like? I can't comment on this vision of the life of Netflix, but it is an issue. How do we show people stuff? How do we talk about the future? How do we show that seeing is believing? So, storytelling can change the world. This is an image of a gentleman called Taffy Thomas, who is a great storyteller. I think he's a storytelling resident in Grasmere in the Lake District. A lovely chap. I have met him. He's wearing a tail coat, which is not T-A-I-L, but T-A-L-E coat. So he was made this coat with all these stories on it. It's a lovely chap. So we can do this. You know, storytelling can change the world. We know we want communication. We need to communicate. Not everybody has the gift of the gab. We can't all do it. We know that. Nor is everyone a wordsmith. We're not always very good at crafting the right words, even if we can't, not even very good at saying them. There are people who are good at these kind of things. So we need to do this stuff. Are we as individuals the people to lead on communication, or should we be looking for somebody else? You know, we come across an issue, we've got a problem, we've got to get our messages across. How do we lead on? Perhaps somebody else should be doing it. Do we know somebody else that could do it better? If it's not us, you know, none of us are sort of good at everything. Perhaps we learn to find someone else can put these words together and talk about it. And perhaps where is a team leader? Perhaps who can bring the skills into a team into our area. Where is it? If we're going to have this skill, we need other skills, I'm sure, as well. What about somebody who can, if we're not that person either, where is somebody that can pull all these things together in our area? Because it's a joint effort, after all. We do all need to be engaged in this. So, some of you may have heard this. I mean, this is just an idea. This is something that's been around for a while. Belbin team roles. A chap called Belbin. And he looked at the different roles within a team, a functioning team, as to what the sort of skills and attributes they might have. And he's identified 9 of them. This is an illustration from something called bite-sized learning. And I'll just read what it says. The types of behavior in which people engage are infinite, but the range of useful behaviors which make an effective contribution to team performance is finite. So that's what Mr. Berman has said. So maybe if we're thinking about teams, being in teams local, not just for communication, for doing the things we're doing, it may be that the team worker guy in the middle of the screen there is perhaps the guy we're talking about with getting the messages out, spreading positive team vibes. But that's beginning to think about, we do need to get the messages out. We do need to communicate. It's not a single person job. So let's think about maybe having a bit of an effort on teams and where it is in our groups we're working. A lot of us working in teams already, great collaboration. There's a great team, what we can do about it. And as Frank Carson used to say, it's a cracker. It's a cracker. It's one of his other catchphrases. So if it is going to be working, if it's going to be good, then let's give it a shot. And as ever, this is something I say at least once every day. Let us go forward together. It needs to be a team effort. Anybody now or after this meeting has got some ideas about communication and how we get these things together, let's please share. So I'm going to stop sharing just now. I'll just have a look at the chat while we sort of gather ourselves. Somebody's like, is it the official view of the IPCC that 1.5 degrees C has been breached? I'm not sure, Gary, but I've been assured by a number of people that it's accurate. Feeding the slugs well in Cotswold. Okay, fine. Belbin named his plant well. Thank you for all those thoughts. So shall we have, thank you, Gary, also for the Cloud Forest connection there. So I know I've got at least one marketing strategist in the meeting. I'm not going to point them out. No, I'm not going to point them out. But if somebody would like to start the conversation, if that person would stop smiling, would stop giving the sting away. Bonnie.
Yeah, it's just so wonderful to be reminded of these things. I've come across that piece of research before with all the different categories, but actually I think they've updated it since I last read it. And it's just, for me, those different categories of kind of people in the UK are just so poignant and so spot on. And actually just, it's fundamental marketing principles, but tailoring the message to the audience is absolutely key. I suppose for me, what's useful here is thinking about how we can make several different messages from one organisation. And I've really found that in the work I do with PACE. So in terms of talking about any kind of activity, but particularly community climate action, what I've noticed is that you have to communicate several different sets of messages on several different channels. And I think this is, you know, the messages we're kind of putting across have to fit the audience and have to fit the channel. So for example, quite often locally when we're doing things, there's a whole collection of people I won't reach, if, for example, if I talk on social media, because they just don't do social media. There's a slightly older demographic local to where I live who only really see posters. And so we do come in for quite a lot of flack if we put posters up and then cover them in plastic. So we've, for example, locally, we've found a way of talking about the activity we're doing on posters, but with what we've found to be waterproof paper that doesn't involve plastic. It's some magic sorcery. So just as a sort of local tip to get the message you want on the right channel, if any of you do need to kind of raise awareness locally, that is a very helpful thing. I'll dig out a link for it and share it in case it's helpful for any of the rest of you. But yeah, the right message for the right audience is just brilliant. It's genius. It's old and it still works.
Okay, many thanks, Bonnie. And I'm a huge fan of posters myself. We got some, if we've got some billboards up while people are doing some building work, nice great big blank spaces to put posters on. There we go. Peter Bates.
Yeah, Andrew, that was great. That's fantastic. I want to book you for doing an online event for Cambridgeshire people later.
Very welcome.
That. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because this is exactly the type of thing I was thinking of when we had on Saturday. We had at a village in East Cambridgeshire, which was Burwell, had a carnival there, and we actually utilised for the first time what's called an Imaginarium kit with an expert auxiliary, which is around that. And we only had 4 days notice to actually put it all together. So it was almost kind of learning on the job situation, having put up the double marquee with the help of 7 army cadets. We then had to think about how do we actually kind of go out and engage with people who actually are coming to the carnival, and having that type of conversation with them as well, and knowing which type of person we may be actually addressing. And in my case, because I was also at the same time trying to capture people's email addresses to get them on our mailing list. Is trying to know, are you going to have a long conversation with this person and that person's just going to walk away and you can't have any further contact with them in that respect. So how do we actually get around to do that? So yeah, it's great. I haven't got any answers, but I'm learning.
Because I think having more than one people at an event like that obviously is part of it, and also trying to collect people's contact details if they're given to you is another. Okay, great. Thank you for that, Peter. Amanda.
Technology is not working well for me today. I apologise for that. It wouldn't unmute.
Me neither.
Now. So my reference to personally feeding the slugs well in the Cotswolds is that I have this year really taken to allotments, but so have the slugs. I think we're all dealing with that. They'll be named as plant well. This is all from the chat. I think that as well as the team player, you need the blue sky thinkers. And we're all very good, I think, at being quite creative through all of this and thinking of things that we didn't realize we hadn't thought of before. Or do you see what I mean? You don't know what you don't know until you're with a group of people that are trying to solve the same things or trying to have conversations about something that then you find you add to your own armament. But the last bit that I put in the chat was, remember the huge power in FOMO. By being able to say to people, oh, we're doing such and such, in a way that makes them feel like they're missing out. So they want to come and get on board too. The Me Too's, because I think we're probably in the echo chamber that are of people that are interested and at the front of the train. And I think there's the healthy middle that are interested enough to feel left out if they're not included in, having an allotment or coming along to something. And I think few of our councillors on councils too You've got the one or two that are prepared to do the work, and then you've got plenty others that don't want to be not on the committee.
Right.
They
Okay.
don't actually want to be on the committee, but they're very keen not to be left out. So I
Right.
think don't underestimate the power of FOMO, fear of missing out.
Fear of
And
missing out. Thank you. I was going to
that's
ask
what
you.
it stands for. Yeah, sorry, I'm talking kiddies jargon here. And then the last thing is remember the power in saying to people who say about China that actually most of what's produced in China is for our market. So it's actually our carbon and not theirs.
Right. Good point. Yeah.
It's when we offshore something, it's
Yeah.
actually meant to be part of our carbon economy in the way that we look at the circular economy and the accounting for it. So
Yes,
those
yes.
are some random thoughts from me. And
Okay.
thank you. Thank you very much for
Yeah.
thought-provoking.
I think in terms of our carbon, I think it's something that turned up at Brexit. How do we replace imports by producing things ourselves? I think producing solar panels isn't quite so easy for us as we don't have the necessary rare earths in this nation. I know they're trying to find some in Cornwall, but I don't know how they've got on with that. Okay. Oh, Helen.
Yeah, thanks for that. Brilliant to have a bit of a refresh on that. And I've been experimenting here in St Ives in Cambridgeshire with a group for the last 4 years, and I've been astonished in how long it takes. And I've jotted down a load of notes, but I think we're all, and we say messaging, but I think it's not so much about messaging. It's about being realistic about what you can achieve. So I'm trying to just distill my thoughts down. People won't do anything that they don't perceive there's a problem with. And when people don't perceive there's a problem, they won't do anything. And I think for any one area, you have to run the diagnostics, as I always say, and work out what you can do, what your demographics are. And if you haven't got some things in place, no matter of how many good ideas or good intentions you have, it's just not going to happen. So I kind of look at, yeah, you can do all the marketing stuff, which is tried, tested, it's a science, run campaigns, sprints, get your colourful messages out there to your audience, hire your marketing company, because I find that 99% of people don't understand campaigning or marketing. And so I think you need a critical mass of people that understand that. I often recall, AIDA, attention, interest, desire, action. If what you're actually wanting to do to create, to just generate an action, think through those useful little acronyms in addition to the other one that was just mentioned there. So AIDA, attention, interest, desire, action. People aren't moved to action unless they have some reason to want to protect something, engage with something, or there's some benefit to them. In terms of the longer term thing, yes, the rituals and stories that we have are hugely important. And so those things that have been happening in our communities for the last, 100, 200, 300 years, longer in some places, what can be done? What seeds of change can be planted within those rituals that can begin to embed some of these kind of and reinforce some of that messaging. So, for example, here in St Ives, we have what's called the it's some tradition that's been going for 100 years. I can't remember. It's the name of somebody, but bread ceremony. It's when all of the poor people in the town were given bread, and even up until
it's the duck, isn't it? Yeah. Carry on.
And even till last year. And it's still happening. It's a big thing in the town. It happens around Christmas time, and people are given bags of white bread, biscuits, and jam. And it's like, well, can we not use that ritual to put in locally produced bread, local produce, and distribute that to the community? In the kind of, if you have sort of ceremonies that you conduct in your parishes, how can some aspects of that be adapted to signal and reinforce that times have changed and things need to change? We need to keep hold on the things that give us meaning and continuity. But what can change to establish a new set of considerations that we have to bring into our civic life? So they're all the sort of just some of the things. It's all the sciencey marketing stuff, but you do need a critical mass of people. And one thing somebody once said to me is people have to want to enjoy being together. Yes. So if you're going to create new teams, you have to really generate that build on the social glue. And if people can't find out how local people express their social connections, and many people just don't, will never kind of integrate climate literacy into that. So what can you do with those enlightened souls that can to just shift the focus of that, of how people create and express the social glue of where they live? People are staying indoors too much, I think, even now since COVID, and that is increasing isolation and loneliness and all of the negative impacts that come to that. So, yeah, things like allotment in, light repair cafes, they don't have to be explicitly labelled as some climate action, but, they are. One thing that I've been trialling here with Natural Cambridgeshire, the local nature partnership, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and through some of my grassroots work, is a tell us one thing exercise. So again, you're not messaging, you're not saying we must take climate action. But if you ask questions, what do you think, tell us one thing that you like about where you live. Tell us one thing that was worse now than it was then. Tell us one thing. And although you're not actually asking about climate change, actually quite a lot of people's responses can be linked to making the streets safer, making the streets cleaner, making more local food available through retail outlets, that sort of thing. And so it sort of requires those clever, liberal, whatever we are, social democratic, whatever the label was, to be really clever about, doing those things. And I always say, identify 3 things you can do really well and do them. And it has far more impact than 10 half-baked good ideas that don't quite follow through. So that's just my kind of 2-penn'orth offering there.
Well, that's a brilliant shilling's worth, Helen, and I've been making frantic notes here. Thank you very, very much for this. You've obviously been a long way down this journey already. Great, thank you. Stuart.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for that talk. It was very interesting and enlightening, and especially going through the history of it. How long it's taking us to get action done is quite incredible. But I had been reading a book, How to Talk About Climate Change, by Rebecca Huntley, and my sort of take from that was that absolutely everyone is impacted by climate change, and you have to find the little levers that are different for different people. I was quite interested in the football team, who came out recently and said the percentage of their matches being cancelled because their pitch is being flooded more and more and more. So you could use that as a start to start talking about sort of rainfall and climate change and the environment. There are certain cricket clubs now which are fearful of having matches in the summer because it's going to be too hot for them. Even now, talk of the Olympics in Paris. They're saying they might be impacted by an impending heat wave coming. Different groups of people are going to have different levers. Young parents, they might be very concerned about their children living near busy roads in polluted atmosphere. And only yesterday, figures coming out from London saying, I think it was 150,000 children under 5 had been admitted to hospital for respiratory problems. If that is a big thing to them, then use that as an opening to, well, we need to improve public transport, electrify cars, those sort of things. So I think engaging with your audience on something which affects them and then links to climate change is quite a good way forward.
Right. Thank you very much, Stuart. Yes, I think we're getting a very good handle today on the processes and the approaches we need to take. But the more we can get in terms of obviously practical, reusable ideas through this, the better. We obviously need to start collecting them. Tristram.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your talk, Andrew. Very good. I have a slightly different view of this because it strikes me that of your 8 types of people who have a different attitude to climate change, very nearly all of them, except there is a problem. I think the climate deniers are now almost gone. And so everybody, I think, sort of wants to do things. I think the problem is they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And I think I went to a couple of climate emergency type meetings saying, what should we do? One at my parish level, one at a group of parishes that set up a climate emergency action group, and one at a Hart district level. And what's common about them all is that nobody can say, this is what we have to do. Here's a proven system that will help us reduce carbon by getting community energy in a big way. Some of them start by having little messages saying, well, let's persuade people via posters not to overfill our kettles. And that's fine, but I think some of those groups get frustrated because they say, well, that's not going to solve the problem. That's really chipping at the very edge. It's important, but it's not a solution. So I'm also a great believer in the power of the parish and the local community. If you can get an action going that has a really good chance of success, I think people will join it. The problem is people just don't know what to do. And I think if we go back a week to Alex Templeton's talk last week, where he has a company which is raising capital to enable a parish level or a community level to install community solar energy, which they are happy to sell at a cut rate from the normal electricity suppliers. That is the basis of a plan that I think 7 out of 8 of those groups of people would say, yes, I'll get behind that. If I don't have to invest my own money up front, if I can pay back, if I'm helping the climate, if I'm going to get cheaper electricity, what's not to like? Everybody would do it. So I think what we're short of is proven methodologies that make a significant impact. And that to me is the core challenge. If we could solve that, I think people would stay in these groups. And it's interesting that the climate groups I was talking about, one of them has just fallen by the wayside because a lot of people came to the first meeting full of enthusiasm, but actually nobody could work out what to do.
Right.
And so it sort of faded away. But if we could have a proven method of getting community energy done and a sort of script that a parish could follow, that I think would make a massive difference. And that's what I think the Great Collaboration is about.
Yes,
analyzing all the methods that have been tried, working out which ones work, and writing them up with case studies so that at a local level, people can say, we know this works, let's do it. And that's to me by far the biggest problem.
Yeah, and that's our core mission. Absolutely. Yeah, many thanks for that. Yeah. Took the words right out of my mouth, sir. Well done. Bonnie again.
Tristram, just to say that Professor Jules Pretty at the University of Essex has done a really helpful piece of research, and he's basically identified the top I think it's 30 different actions that you could take as an individual that are proven to make a difference, and he's kind of allocated, if you do this, how much carbon per year would you save? And it's actually a very accessible, useful way of looking at it. So I'll find the link for it and share it in a bit.
Thank you.
Just to that point, and thinking about your group, that you were mentioning that's closed down. One of the things we do in PACE is we've got a matrix where we decide which projects are run, basically. And one of the things I've noticed is that although you do need like a collection of team roles done, ultimately no project will run without a leader. So what we've identified in our matrix of how to decide which projects is that, among other things, we choose projects that have a steady and kind of consistent leader who's prepared to commit. And then we know that we also need a backup person to that leader who's prepared to step in if they aren't able to consistently do it. And what we found is that will usually ensure the success of a project or a group. So among other things, you also need to have the resources. It needs to be something that involves our local community. It needs to be something that actually does have an impact on climate. So, for example, we had a bit of a to and fro when we ran the Manning Tree Earth Festival, because it was a local awareness raising event. Essentially, did it have a positive effect on the climate? No, because actually we were bringing loads of people together. There was the kind of the transport implications and all sorts of things. But because it did so many other things, we decided it was worth running. So I would say that, I mean, I've used Belbin team types in a business context forever, but it's very helpful to sort of remind ourselves of it. But I would say that the team can form, but not until they can form around a leader. And that's what we've noticed in our groups, is that the leader must come first. So either probably not, the shaper needs to come first in that context. One of the other things we did locally was we put together a poster called the 40 Ways, and it's basically 40 ways for you to take action locally. And it's a poster which we initially created and we hyper localized it. So we specifically put on there ways that you, things that related to our local area. So specific bus routes, for example, where we'd made a difference, or specific trees or parks that needed to be used. We put the kind of the imagery and the wording to be really local. That's a poster. If anybody wants it, it's a
Yes,
poster
please.
we've made available. We've made the artwork available so it can be localized to any group.
Fantastic.
And we found that that had quite good traction. But in terms of whether it actually generated action, that is, I agree, the hardest bit to monitor, because even if it does create action, often you won't know. And so I think that's that's really the final point that for me is quite pertinent here, is that, you know, yes, we will go out and talk to people, and yet we won't know what that's done, and it's tempting to feel it hasn't done anything. But what we've noticed locally is that if all of us talk about this subject, essentially its profile just gets raised.
Yeah.
And when I did the climate literacy training a little while ago, the carbon literacy training, sorry, what they were saying there was people haven't really got the tolerance for being told anything. They don't want to be told. What they want is to be asked questions. So just to refer back to that point, I can't remember who just said it, but what we've noticed is that if you ask people their perspective on this, that, or the other, if you ask them to talk to you about, I don't know, parents who sit outside school with their engine idling, for example, they will certainly have an opinion, and actually asking them about that and having them express an opinion, even to the detriment of climate change, just raises its awareness. And that's actually one of the things that kind of scientifically the Carbon Literacy Project has said makes a difference, is just to raise the issues in people's minds. And it reminded me of a selling principle that I learned years ago about planting seeds. So yeah, you might not feel this conversation that you have with somebody has made any difference whatsoever, and maybe it hasn't, but from a fundamental marketing perspective, you may need to contact somebody 7 times with the same message before you might get action. So if you think that the first conversation perhaps plants the seed, the second conversation maybe waters it, the third conversation maybe allows it to break through the surface of the ground. Yeah, you get the analogy. So even when we feel we haven't made a difference, we probably have.
Right. Thank you very much for that. Yes. Yeah, I'm so pleased you're here, Bonnie, because this is obviously this is your profession. Fantastic, fantastic. Okay, Amanda.
Thank you. I'm really enjoying listening to everybody's contributions, because just when you think that you've got something cracked, there's another angle you haven't thought of, and you could have thought of it, but it's to take somebody else to actually articulate it, to add it onto your long list. And I wanted to say, when we're working with other people, I mean, I put in the chat that I was involved in a lot of health education and also within schools, education, behavioural change projects. And we could do worse than having a look at some of the lessons from there around the quit smoking campaigns, for example, and very much the nanny state and so on. And I think people hardened their feelings about around COVID times about being told. So I very much always appreciate reminders about asking people questions and engaging. But when you look at it on an individual level, because ultimately we as a society are a group of multiple individuals, the psychology for those of us who maybe feel sometimes we've got to put our head in the sand because it's all getting too much, and the psychology of the anxiety that comes with it, or we might have children who are expressing climate anxiety, And I'd like to make a suggestion, perhaps for somebody who I might be able to encourage to take part in one of these sessions as a presenter.
Great.
And that's Linda Aspey, who I've put details in the chat.
Thank
But
you.
she does Let's Talk. Sorry, Alexa, stop. Oh, honestly, apologies. She's talking to me about climate now.
Sorry.
Linda does this talk. It's an interactive workshop that she does, but I'm sure she could be invited to do something here. And it's basically about how climate psychology can improve our climate conversations. And it seems directly relevant to what we're doing here today. And she's local to me in the, North Cotswolds area.
Right. Thank you. Very kind. Yeah, well, that's great. We always need more speakers at these events, by the way. For this, thank you for that idea. Any other ideas on any topic, please let us know. Thank you very much, Amanda. Helen. The fickle finger of fate.
Yeah, I've just put a few links in the chat, but
Thank you.
I've worked a lot in health research and behavioural change around information security and so forth. So there are some, people, yeah, going back to the stories thing, people respond to places they know and people they know, where they can see themselves and people they know and places they know. So case studies, yes, are really important, but case studies of places and people that are familiar and often told by people they know. So that thing about trust, people, the right people. And yes, case studies, and I always think, yeah, they're brilliant. But for me, it's, you're inundated. There are maybe case studies of, communities in Cornwall, in Scotland, have done amazing community energy schemes, but because people go, well, it's just in their heads, it's a long way off, it doesn't necessarily translate because you've got a different set of people and different set of circumstances. So I get the thing about case studies, and I'm always saying, yeah, we need more case studies, but they sort of need to be local case studies. And things like community energy schemes are really, really complicated sometimes. And I think you have to be realistic about what is and isn't in place within your tiers of authorities. And I know here in Cambridgeshire, Peterborough, for example, got some UKRI monies to do a pathfinder around community energy. And then they got, I don't know how many it was, hundreds of thousands, and they've got 3 million as a next stage to take that on. That was Peterborough. Cambridgeshire thought, oh, perhaps we need that bit of that. So they've now got some money, and I'll look at from UKRI as part of that scheme, and are beginning to more formally look at what a pathway might look like for that. So I think you've got to be realistic about your sphere of concern and your sphere of influence. And there's no, just thinking, well, we need a community energy scheme. But if your district or higher tier authority doesn't have a clue, a target, a strategy, it's really, really difficult, almost impossible. So, you've got to be clear about what is in place and what isn't in place at your various tiers to actually what will happen on the ground. I say that as an example here in Cambridgeshire. We started off doing climate cafes, and they've become to be themed. And we had a really, really good energy one with some great speakers from the county council, a couple of local experts, and so forth. And people came together and they said that was an amazing meeting. But nothing, and people felt informed, but nothing has happened because we haven't got the policies in place, or sufficient groundswell of interest to actually make something happen. But a few people went away, probably, I don't know, have insulated their house better or investigated air source heat pumps or something. And I also say that often, and Peter Bates will know this, because it's I think it's a village on his patch. There's a village in Cambridgeshire that has been always used in Cambridgeshire as a model community energy scheme. But I think it took about 10 years to develop and was part of a research project. And you actually happen to have some really, really clever people living in that village. And so you might have this super case study and go, oh, if they can do it, we can do it. But actually, it took years to develop and is now being implemented. So I think we're just being realistic about what can be achieved and what isn't in place, and attend to the conditions that create the opportunities, and so that people's ideas can be managed. And you don't want to obviously shut down people's ideas, but only a certain amount of things realistically can be achieved if the kind of infrastructure or the policies aren't in place.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm a great believer that every project has its time, and that it will happen over time. But I think when I'm beginning to think that while we've got action plans for our area, we also now need communications plans as well, because if we're going to get it done, we need to think about how we get people engaged. Very much so, and that's really the story at the moment. David, you've got your hand up, sir.
Yeah, hi. I'm just picking up a point, just carry on a bit of the conversation Tristram started. I'm also in the same district as Tristram, and we've been working at the district level. I think one of the problems that I've identified is that despite 300 district councils signing up to a climate emergency, whatever the hell that means, certainly dealing with the one that we're dealing with, they haven't got a clue how to actually translate a snappy little phrase into a practical plan of campaign that will allow the district to work out how it's going to go down to net zero over a particular time period. So it strikes me that there's a real deficit in terms of the ability of councils to understand what the problem is, understand what resources are available, and there seems to be a lot, including people on the call. And how do you translate that understanding into a set of actions that allows the population and moves with the population, so they are part of it, not fighting it,
Yep.
like the ULEZ scheme, which has just been an absolute unmitigated disaster.
Okay.
And so it strikes me that that is one of the critical bits that are missing. I come from a sort of a military background and have had a lot of experience in quite complex planning. And one of the things I'm going to try and do is there's a consultancy firm that I work for that I'm going to try and bring in some of the skills that they use to help develop the district council's ability to plan better. So I'm going to have a discussion with them on Friday, I hope, to work out whether this might be something they might be interested in doing.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that, David. I mean, around the country, it varies enormously. Some counties and districts are well up for this and getting into it, and some aren't. And very much that reflects down at parish and town council level as well. So we've got, there are different levels that we're doing things with a great collaboration. We've got some working groups, for example, we're developing a pilot action, as many of us know, in East Anglia, Cambridgeshire, Essex, Norfolk and Suffolk. And we're having some working groups there to pull those, how we approach those audience there. It's just again part of inspiration for today's session. And very much sports clubs are part of that, are a team within that enterprise, and higher level authorities are in that as well. And what we're hoping to learn is, as we get through, not only are we going to make a difference on the ground in East Anglia, but we learn a lot more way how we can make a difference elsewhere in the country as well. So there's 4 counties there. There'll be another 36 to go. But that's very much where we're at. And I'm so pleased to have all the feedback and the discussion we've had today, because I think this is about, going back to Mr. Frank Carson, it's the way we tell them. We have to find the way to tell them, which makes a difference, and so bring things forward. There's also questions about how we collect data from the results of actions. That's something we're looking at too within the pilot. We're looking at having digital mapping. Tristan's had to leave us, but working with Parish Online on a digital mapping process where parishes log in and get involved in the project, and then they record how they're getting on.
Yeah, we got there.
And so we were looking at how we can involve that in there as well. Certainly in terms of teams, we're looking at finding ways of finding people to get engaged with stuff. I'm just going to have a quick share of something on the screen again, which is our template for actions, guidance that we're producing. This is what our Sarah Batterby calls the one-pager. And you'll see, here's the project. And right at the top, who's going to be the leader? Who's going to be the partners for it? This is particularly gauged at aimed at parishes and town councils, but of course it can apply to other bodies and groups as well. Skills, resources, materials. Some case studies are great, but they tend to show, tell us roughly how they did it. A nice picture of the ribbon cutting, but don't tell you all this detail, all these different things. And this is the bit that I'm particularly keen on, the steps to success. How do we actually get this going in somewhere else in the country? And there's things there about outcomes and measurements as well. So that's just a quick look at the kind of approach we're looking for, gathering guidance and good practice within the great collaboration. Amanda, put your hand up.
Are you able to share that with us, Andrew?
Yeah, I will put that in the chat.
Because I think that template would really help. Sometimes I find there's a lot of enthusiasm in the room, but then when you leave the room, it's not clear who's actioned what, or have we captured every angle. And I just think if we've got like a checklist, it's a really helpful just to have that framework to capture it all. Thank you, Andrew.
Be reminded of the.
Yeah. So I'll just put in the link in the chat to the climate action web page on the SOCC website, and that creating allotments is on that page, as well as various other bits of guidance.
How to persuade. They're talking about climate deniers and how to.
Sarah, is that you? Yeah.
Get people involved and.
This live. I don't understand.
Sarah, I think you maybe need to mute.
Okay, right. Okay, fine, no problem, Claire. There we go. Thought she was talking to me. Right, no problem at all. Well, we've had some great stuff in discussion. We've some great stuff in the chat. I think I'm going to have to go away and put some head together with some of this. I'm so glad that I could be in touch with present company, Bonnie and Helen and Amanda and various people here, because we need to be gathering some of this stuff, because not only do we need to do it ourselves through the great collaboration, we need to help other people to do it as well. So I guess there's going to be, we have got a page on our development website at the moment about communication, and I think a lot of the things that we've been talking about today will need to be on it to inform it, to help us talk about things way forward. Yeah, I mean the 7 different audiences, it's interesting. Some of the language in there is a little bit tricky, but I mean at least it reminds us that there are going to be different types of people out there. There are still some climate deniers out there, of course. There's still some climate deniers chairing parish and town councils. And I get to hear about those on a regular basis. So we have to, quite often I have to try and help somebody think how they can speak to those things. One of the ways around of that, of course, is if we're finding it difficult to get through to somebody, maybe there needs to be a third person. Maybe we're not the right people to be having that conversation. We need to find something else to do it. Some of us have got the gift of the gab and can do things. I mean, our friend Jules Thompson from Suffolk is not here today, but he's a big one on selling stories and so forth. So we can always rely on Jules to get messages across in a lively sort of way. So he's our guy for that. Hi, Jules. He's not here. Okay. You may see the recording. So I think we've done very well here. Thank you so much. It's 10 minutes past 1 just now. Is there anybody else who got any more points they'd like to raise or any more questions they'd like to ask? Put them in the chat by all means, because we'll chase these up. Right. Okay. Thank you very much. I believe next week is it 9 trees, something like that. I'll send a message round about next week. There is our friend Graham, who usually chairs these sessions, to say he's in a boat in the middle of the Bay of Biscay at the moment. And